Good night, good evening, and most welcome to 912 of the H series. I will today talk about a broader sense of opening space. And this might sound putting one term upon another, but it is not really my attention. It is a little bit that we can widen in more dimensions than one. So I've been earlier talking about widening, letting space in. And I think the first take I took there, that is extremely important, that you are not trying to imagine some fantasized space or made up space, because that will automatically bring you to self-confirmation and the simulacrum. It is actually the very case that the world is real, and not in this modern sense, but in a sense that actually means something. There is one thing after that I thought about, and that was talking about the hunter-gatherer of the Namibia desert, or why not the indigenous people of the Amazonas. I was in particular thinking about the Yamami people. I really like they have a vowel sound like we have in Swedish, Yamami. When they go around in their jungle, they have personal memories to each place. They have emotional, sensual, knowledgeable connections. So it's not only do they know the names of the plants, their plants also have a specific history in their memory, in their past, and they can always say something personal about that from their own Geschichte, as Heidegger would say, their lived history, not the spoken history. So there is a bodily connection, and this is a widening in space, because space has memories, it has senses, it has feelings. And these momentums of force bring all these different qualities into space. And that is what space is. So that is a broadening in the different categories that space can be, but also broadening our space in width, breadth and depth. And while doing this, we get closer to both what is in the mental sphere and what is in the exogenous surrounding sphere. And we also let memories interact with the exogenous, and that is very important for the fractality. Someone has said that quantum mechanics brings feelings into physics. Feeling, sensing, memorizing or retention becomes immensely important, because those are the very things that decide the outcome. There is no outcome without a most participating Dasein, or subject, which is sometimes it's called in a very limited sense. The opening up does also go for what is it that causes something. I mentioned earlier cause and effect, that is usually a quite random little feature in reality. For instance, a ping pong ball hitting someone in the head happened to me a couple of years ago. And that becomes the causal effect for the next scene when I was complaining to the golfers, why don't you shout 4 when you hit the ball and it splices? That is a very random outtake. We don't get the whole presencing, because the whole presencing with my sensing, the feeling of the atmosphere, I think it was spring, so most probably it was spring flowers, maybe even some wetness to the air, humidity, cloudiness, anticipation, pretension for the coming dinner. I was hungry. I was also in deep need of a shower. I've been cycling for quite some time. You see, this all come together, and that makes the meaningfulness in each momentum of presencing stronger. It gets its prana, its chi this way. Otherwise, if you cut out some parts randomly and say memory doesn't belong here, or if you're quantum mechanics, you would wrongfully think my subjective emotions or anticipations do not have a role to play in this particular experiment. Then you would be completely dead wrong. Every sort of limitation of the presencing would actually be something that also limit the energy and the possibility to predict the outcome. The same thing I would do with my retention if I were to do that, blocking out some things for some reason, either because of randomness limitations, but also for those things that usually follow random limitation, and that is not very strong intention of connecting to memories because you don't like them, they feel awkward, and other stuff. That would be much easier to avoid memories if you have always already this randomness in play. It makes preciseness very hard. And this is also something that goes for muddled or unclear thinking. We are no longer thinking in a straight line. The randomness and the haphazardness and chance that has entered our thinking because of the self-confirmation and how the ego, by complete subjectivity or some slight part of the emotional, chooses one thing above another and make these limitations. And of course of that immense unquenchable thirst and hunger for presence that haunts modern man for completely normal reasons, because we are simply not any longer here. We are out of the picture, no longer participating in something that could be called a real world of colors, intentions, emotions, a blood-filled, real, down to the dirt world. No, by weird incisions everywhere, we involuntarily has limited our own experience, and we are thirsty for space. We need time that speaks to us, that is different all the time, and that has this wondrous character of fractality instead of that absolutely random obliteration of characteristics that abounds in the subject-ego connection. Doesn't really give us anything to put our lives to or live in. The sustenance for the human soul is the radical otherness, and that is the actual possibility for knowing, knowledge and wisdom, and also development. And that thing, that is the soul. The soul is not an entity, it is the actual growing. And something that doesn't grow is not a soul. That has to do with how things spiral up in the hierarchy of chaotic organizations. It constantly goes up because that is the very structure of the upgoing moment, the direction. Every instant of direction we take means progress. Otherwise there is no direction. The direction is muddled and unclear, and then there is no soul. The soul is to grow every instant of our life, and as much as possible putting awareness into the presencing, getting as many parts of reality in at the same time. And to do that we need to radically question previous limitations that unnecessarily are in place. So that is also important, unnecessarily in place. They were never put there by intention, they were never ever thought out by someone. And that is the very problem that makes them hide. And we often speak of narrow-minded people, and this is quite literally the case. It is not a bad description. A narrow-minded person is a person who doesn't take in all the glory of the world, all the richness of the world, all of what the world has to offer. It is always a person that denies himself the full pleasure of the world. There is not another reason for narrowness. Forget about these evil kings who supposedly both were happy and evil. That is not the case, because narrowness is the very effect of shutting things out, both from yourself and others. Let me mention a little bit about deconstruction coming from Nagarjuna, because I think it's something of another take of the Derridian project. And then I'm speaking of cause and effect. Cause and effect is, when I use it this way, usually how we use it in a limited sense, when we don't take in the whole picture. Cause and effect in itself could be looked upon more carefully in a sort of a deconstructive way, and this is what Nagarjuna is doing. This is from his written magnum opus, magia mica. First, if cause and effect are identical, there is nothing new or different that has been brought about. One can understand causality only in terms of some transformation, a newness being brought into existence. If there is a transformation, one cannot argue that cause and effect are identical. Second, to say that cause and effect are not at all identical is equally untenable. If cause and effect are totally different, it is impossible to postulate a continuity between them. Prior to the effect coming into being, there was only the cause. However, the cause cannot be regarded as the originating force of some entity that is non-existent. Moreover, after the cause appears, what legitimacy is there for it to be regarded as having been brought about by the supposed cause? If they are, as argued, totally different from one another, I think that actually is something very, very peculiar and interesting, because cause and effect is something we seldom look into. I think I mentioned this like 200 lectures ago about Aristotle having 4 causes. I think there is even more causes and effects. But today we use this coin-like thing, so we stamp every cause and effect into the same mold and say that they are all similar. There is not, as Aristotle would say, an effective cause, nor is there an intentional cause or a material cause, and so forth. His 4 causes would have covered much more of reality than the singular cause we have today. And to be honest, the singular cause we have today is incredibly ineffective. It just says that one atom hits another atom, or even less so. One quark hits another quark, or whatever that could be. It doesn't help us in our daily decisions. It's incredibly narrow, and it blocks all the sense of connectedness between moments away. We have a way of looking at the connectedness between moments that completely blocks out the fractality of the connections. The fractality of the connections is time as having a sense to it. If you have time as absolutely homogeneous, without any flavor of what time of day it is, this specific light that approaches that specific energy, if everything during the day is absolutely homogeneous in your experience, you don't have a living connection to time. And this has 2 sides to it. This is something that Susie Froebel takes up. For to have scientific objective time, you need to be in contact with your sensing machine. So how you sense time in terms of your own inner energy, the quality of your thinking that is constantly changing, never the same, the area, so to speak, the ambient in your thinking space, which is also different, how your bodily feel is different. This is the sort of fractality on the subjective side, or on the side of me, that enters and interact with the flow of the time. that is exogenous. And that exogenous flow of the time could be the light of the day, the specific atmosphere, ambient of 12 o'clock, midday, or in the afternoon. And they are radically different to each other, but they are still interacting. So you're sensing, oh, I'm having this very vivid freshness of noontime when you get this extra energy. It's midday, the sun is very stark. That gives an anticipation towards the outer time, the exogenous time. And as we read yesterday about the hermeneutic circle, you always have an anticipation of what's going to be out there. That is an absolute necessity to get something back. And I think this is very similar to what we learn from neurology. If you don't have an active perception where you think reality is in a certain way, you instead are being passive, waiting for the world to come to you, you have already blocked out perception, because perception is a giving and a taking. And if you don't give anything, you're willing to say the world is this way, you won't get anything back, nothing at all. And of course this is radically different from the idea of scientific forehandle, where both the object and the subject are terribly, horribly reduced. Reduced beyond redemption. Whereas in the fractality, you have to have a perception of what things are beforehand. That is an absolute necessity. And these also show why you need to organize yourself in a certain way, in a certain direction, building up these traditions, these ways of seeing the world, because that becomes your pretension, your anticipation. And it's not so much about the anticipation being acclaimed with it was a good assumption or it was a bad assumption. It's rather it is interacting fractally with the exogenous. The exogenous doesn't have any definitive properties like in the take of the objective world. No, it is the interactiveness that can give the object of the world. Not that we are blindly, without actively participating in the world, that gives us an objective world. It is our anticipation, our preemptive thinking of the world, that we already have a sense what we are going to experience. And sure, this sounds like prejudice, but it's not. It's an absolute necessity to experience the world. And that, of course, has to do with the senses being active. But look at it this way. Since or acting with their hands and their arms, of course, is an intermingling with the world. It's hardly passive to walk around in the world. Then somebody could say, some crazy analytical philosopher, oh, you're meddling with the world, you're not being passive, you're not being scientifically forehanded. Nobody would say that, but you're still meddling with the world in the eyes of the fanatical analytical philosopher. The same goes for the senses. You need to have a preconceived idea and image before you start. And I think that is something that many people don't understand about painting. There you will definitely learn to paint something that really capture like something like this nice rainy autumny street scene. You need to have an exact model that maybe is a model you had before you even saw this street scene. And this is what you give to the exogenous. And that giving makes it possible to interact fractally. And the more different your model is from the fractality of the other side, the more of this truthfulness and objectivity you receive. And this is, of course, incredibly different from any sort of normal sensing of how these things are working. But I can tell you it has happened a lot within both typology and neurology. And Susie Frober's book is one of those amazing pioneer works that actually started already 10 years ago, then when this was still a sort of a baby science. That is no longer the case, and almost all of the assumptions that were made in concord with other scientists by Susie Frober are now acclaimed, and we are working forward in that direction, which is also so similar to the Heideggerian view and takes in a lot of protension and retention of Edmund Husserl. But it is widely interesting because here we have a neurology with a Derridian touch. This is the incredible contribution of the postmodern world. Go eat that, Jordan Peterson. I say thank you very much and have a very good night.